we're going to build like a little half room in my garage at the house we're going to. It won't look as nice as this, unfortunately.
Sure. When you say half room, that's for you for this purpose?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. I don't even have that.
No.
I have a corner of my basement that I've kind of, if you saw the table I was sitting at, it's embarrassing.
No, that's fine. It's an audio podcast anyways. We could be we could be naked. We might be naked. In fact, we are naked. I think
from the waist down, you don't know what's going on. So
that's right. I'll take your word for it. And what shirt you got there?
It's a company called Severin. They put out exploitation films and stuff like that. I did some work for them, and so they keep giving me stuff.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you got some swag. Severin.
Yeah,
all right, well, check out
bad.
Exploitation. What do you mean by that? Like violence and nudity and all that good stuff?
Yep. They'll do stuff that's straight up porn. That's not stuff I get from them. They'll do a lot of weird foreign horror. Yeah.
Oh, well.
Listen, we all have porn machines on our phones now. Like, I don't need to get stuff on disc.
Yeah. Hey, check out this. Yeah, DVD. Right. Great. I gotta find a DVD player. Yeah. All right. So, is there any questions before we start rolling into the official program?
No, I think we'll kind of figure this out as we go. Because my question is, I don't know what criteria we're using to judge, but we can
every
talk
episode.
That through. Okay.
Sounds like every episode. As this podcast is continued, it's more and more disarray. It doesn't make sense, but I think it's still fun. It's still fun to do.
Welcome to the worst of the best podcast. You wanted the best. Well, they didn't freaking make it. So here's what you get. From Canada.
And from Pennsylvania.
Ryan and
Doug. Welcome to the Worst of the Best podcast. I am your host, Ryan, and with me today we have a very special guest host. This gentleman has his own podcast, which I want him to describe and talk about on his own, but welcome to the show, Nice Doug.
Oh, thank you for having me. First of all, I say thank you for having me. I basically begged to come on your show, and you were nice enough to say, you know what? How about tomorrow? I was like, okay, great, fine. I will do all the research I need to in that amount of time.
Research? Boy, you're better prepared than half my hosts. I appreciate that.
Well, we're talking about 10 films, kind of. We're talking about the films. So I wanted to come in with some sort of prep or some sort of knowledge beyond just what I've seen before.
No, that's fair, and I appreciate that. So tell us about the podcast that you run and what it's about. And I want to know actually how you got started and why you got started.
No, that's great. My podcast name is Good Times, Great Movies. I host it with a friend of mine, Jamie, and we've been doing the podcast. We're actually in our 6th year of the show. We started back in 2015. It's been so long. I don't even know how it got started. Like, I knew I wanted to do a podcast. Actually, a friend of mine started a podcast, and I kind of listened and went, well, if he can do this, I could probably figure it out. But I didn't know what I wanted it to be about. I knew who I wanted to do this with, so I threw this out to my friend, and I said, hey, how about I come up with 3 to 4 topics, you come up with 3 to 4. So we landed on an 80s movie podcast. It was her choice because, honestly, up front, I am not a fan of the 80s in general. The fashion, the music, the art, it's so aggressive in such a way that I'm really turned off to it.
Sure, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I think the podcast has got me to appreciate it a lot more. You and I are basically the same age, just from listening to your show. How old am I? 43.
Okay, I'm
so
45. Yeah.
So we're roughly the same age. So I always think of myself more as I'm an 80s child, but I think of myself more as a 90s human being. Like the first half of the 90s, I was in high school. Second half, I was in college. So those are really my formative years. So I love music from the 90s. I love movies from the 90s. And the 80s always felt like,
sure, okay,
that's kid stuff, whatever. The podcast has gotten me to appreciate those films a little more. what we do is we do not take it seriously. We basically just take the piss out of these movies.
Well, I listened to your Rocky 4 episode. I went back to some of your back
Very
catalog.
early.
Yeah.
Episode number 4.
Yeah, that's right. And I remember thinking, who's gonna rag on Rocky 4? Well, you guys did. And that's
course.
Okay. That's okay.
And we'll rag on things like I absolutely adore. RoboCop is one of my favorite movies ever made.
Oh, yeah.
But it's easy to make fun of.
Of course.
It's easy to joke.
Every point that you brought up making fun of Rocky 4, yeah, I get it. Yeah, right. You know what I mean? It's like, of course. You can't love something as much as I do regarding the Rocky series and not obviously see why people, whatever angle they're coming from, I always say your opinion is always right.
Yeah, but also the other thing that I say all the time is there's a good chance I'm wrong about a lot of things I say.
Well, you were, but I didn't want to say that.
Right, exactly.
No,
I have watched movies before that I absolutely hate. Everyone adores, and I'm like, I think it's me. I can identify that. You're saying you're always right. I'm assuming I'm wrong going into anything.
Oh, sure. No, that's good. I appreciate that background. So check out their podcast. Sure. I'm going to go through it and specifically listen to the episodes because you have a big catalog of movies that I'm very familiar with. So I started with Rocky 4 and I go up for that.
Yeah, I would suggest for you personally, just because I've been really rifling through your back catalog just in preparation to come on, listen to our Temple of Doom episode.
It's my favorite. It's my favorite one. It's my favorite one.
I know. I listened to you say that, and I was kind of nervous telling you to check that one out. That is not my favorite.
Sure. Well, I can already see in my mind with the things you're going to say, of course. But right. But no, that's great. I look forward to hearing that take. But I have a real soft. I love that movie. But before we get into our actual topic today, and I hope we're not boring our listeners, but they are maybe just skip ahead a few minutes. The reason why I called you Nice Doug, there's a little story there. We both listened to a podcast. We're mutual listeners of another podcast that's called Who Are These Podcasts? And I actually had Carl, the main host of that podcast, come on, and he did the Star Wars episode. So if you're listening to this episode and you missed that episode of Carl and I doing Star Wars, I recommend listening to that if you've come on this one because Nice Doug is here.
The whole reason I'm here.
Yes.
Carl talked about you on his show. I heard that, and I went, you know what? If Carl's willing to go on this show, it must be somewhat entertaining.
Well, that's very kind. It was very kind and gracious of Carl to come on. Now, the deal with his show, and I've said this before, but the deal with his show is they take other podcasts, and they usually take listener suggestions or what have you, or people submit, hey, listen to my podcast, and they tear it apart, just like you do with those 80s movies. They take the piss. They take the piss out of people's podcasts. It's a roasting session. Being a podcaster myself, I listen to this podcast and I'm like, oh boy, I think I've done that. Oh boy, that sounds, oh boy, I got to work on my edits or whatever it might be. If you are a podcaster and not listening to this podcast, I highly recommend it because you might learn something. Mm-hmm. But you submitted your show to this podcast to be roasted by Carl. Now, how did you come across the show enough that you wanted to submit your podcast to it? I
came across his show. There's a Facebook group. I don't even know if it exists anymore because I've been thrown off because I said nice things about his show. But these people were laying into his show.
Yes.
And they were so angry about it. And I basically was like, I got to check this out. And it took me a few episodes because if anybody goes there to listen, I think it's important to understand it can seem very mean. Like Carl can seem unnecessarily mean. So it took me a few episodes until I understood what was going on, and I really enjoyed it. It was right before he kind of blew up. His show's massive now.
And now you volunteered your show, if I remember correctly. Now, before we get to you, I started listening to it at the very beginning, not when it first came out, but I was in a podcast group on Facebook. Somebody mentioned the show because I had a question about music rights or whatever, because I play a lot of music on my podcast. They're like, somebody else takes podcasts from other episodes and music from others. They play music all the time. And I'm like, well, what are they called? They're called Who Are These Podcasts? So I thought I'd check them out, saw the synopsis. Like, well, I'll start with episode 1. If they can hook me in with episode 1, I'll listen to it. I've listened to every episode from there. I binged like crazy. And then you came on. Remind me though, because that was like 100 plus episodes ago. Right. Were you the one where they were convinced you were in love with the host, your co-host? Is that?
Oh yeah.
That's you. Okay.
Yeah. I guess that was when he talked about our show, and then when there was the Doug versus Doug episode, when I won, that was brought up again. Yes.
So for the record, are you in love with your co-host?
No, I mean yes, and she's my best friend in the world, planet Earth, hands down, my best friend. So yes, in that regard, of course.
Okay.
It was early enough into his show where he was still entertaining people's requests.
Right. Yeah.
And the one thing he says is give him a 5-star review on Amazon, but then shit all over him in the comments.
Yes.
And I did that. And at the end of my review, and I think I wrote a review that was pretty funny, I said, hey, tear apart my podcast. He read the review, played a little teaser of my show, and I was over the moon excited. I understand that a lot of people wouldn't want that at all, because a lot of people do this and hope to make money from it, or it's not just a hobby for them.
Right.
For me, it's 100% a hobby. I'm not in it to get advertisers.
No.
I don't care. People play video games for fun. I don't do that. My podcast is a hobby. Like, I loved listening to him make fun of my stupid show. Like, I was so happy. And then I went in immediately after that. I sent him a copy of the movie that he had reviewed or that we had talked about. And then I just sort of put feelers out and said, hey, if you're ever hard up for a co-host, reach out to me. And I was shocked.
Yeah, you've been on about 4 or 5 times?
7 times.
Oh,
I had
7.
to count the other day.
Nice.
Yeah.
Good job. Yeah. So this is a real pleasure to have a fellow Who Are These Podcasts guest hosts, and you're kind of a Hall of Famer at the beginning of that journey. And yeah, it's an incredible show. It really is. I'm not just blowing smoke up Carl's, but
it's like nothing else out there.
It really is.
I listen to so many other movie podcasts, and they all kind of blend together sometimes. But he's doing something that, if anybody else is doing it, they're not on my radar.
No,
and they clearly aren't doing it as well as he does.
But for the record, because my podcast is very safe for work, it's safe for work. But so if you're a fan of my show, the 4 of you, check out his podcast. But it's just not safe for work. That's all I'm saying. So just be mindful of any audience that might.
Oh, no. I have to ramp up my expletive game when I'm going on to his show. I'm not saying that on his show I'm playing a character, but I have to prepare mentally to go on that show.
All right, so there you go. Well, this is great having you on. I think we've established why you're here, and so you heard about my show through his show, and you came to me, and I was really flattered. And so I hope you have a good time while we break down today's topic. You always give the guest host kind of first dibs of the topic they might want to cover, like what's your background? Sure. You love movies and you love horror movies. We're kind of what we're doing is we're picking 10 horror movies that are kind of spawned from quote unquote real life events, and they'll often put in the movie somewhere based on true events or inspired by real events, and they do this in these horror films to up the freak factor in the film.
Sure.
We're going to explain what that real event was, what the film was, and maybe how much of it was lifted versus how much of it might have just been.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm glad you said quote unquote real events. And listeners, please understand that those are the largest quotes possible. When I read these, I was like, none of these make sense. None of these are interesting. And none of them have anything to do with the movies. Like, it's a crazy list. And when
some of them aren't too bad. Some of them, maybe the ones you have, because we divided it in half. I found a few of mine weren't too bad.
You know what I did? I did this purposely.
Okay.
I did not read yours.
Perfect. Yet. I didn't read yours.
Okay, great.
We're like veteran podcasters. I kind of want to hear your take fresh, so to speak.
I was going to say, I was just being lazy. I didn't know.
Oh, it's that too, of course. Well, that's why we divide the workload, so you don't have to do my work. I don't have to do your work.
Great.
And as per normal guest host, you'll probably do a better job with your research than I do. All right. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to start with number 10. For horror films, I love horror films too, and my wife my wife does not like horror films. So I often, if I have to watch anything that's scary, anything that's scary whatsoever, has a scary element, whether it's a thriller, scary, I have to watch by myself.
Oh, same. Okay. Same here. My wife cannot stomach that stuff. I also watch a lot of foreign films, a lot of old films. None of that. She will not. No, I'm sorry. If there's subtitles, she's out. If it's a scary movie, she's out. If it's black and white, maybe she'll stick around for a bit, but that's still a red flag.
Okay, well, good. So we have a similar background. We both enjoy horror films. Now, out of these 10, there was only a few that I haven't legit seen, but that won't affect. We're not reviewing the film per se. We'll make sure our feelings on some of the films because we've seen them, but this isn't a review of the films. This is just the story that spurned the films, and we'll give a general background of the films. The first one is, of course, the classic A Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, I assume you have seen this series, or at least this film?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I've seen the entire series, for better or worse.
Well, for better or for worse. Well, you know what? Here's the thing about Nightmare on Elm Street. The first one, or at least the first couple, were legit creepy and fun, but they had a really good creepy factor, especially the Freddy Krueger character. What a great creepy guy. Those claws, the burnt skin. For anyone that doesn't know, basically what Freddy does is he haunts people in their dreams around the neighborhood of Elm Street. And it's, of course, his youth. And if you fall asleep and he gets into your dreams, whatever he does to you in the dream, you'll feel the effects in, quote unquote, the waking world.
If you take he and Jason Voorhees and Leatherface, I don't know, take all the icons and put them in a bag. He's my favorite, hands down, because he has a personality. I mean, it gets really goofy by like 3.
Yes.
He's quipping and everything, but he's not afraid to talk. He's not afraid to mess with these kids. He's not afraid to taunt the people he's about to kill. He's probably my favorite of these prototypical slasher icons.
Nice. Okay. I don't think Halloween, is it on the list? Is it one of yours?
No.
Okay, so I don't think it's not on the list. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So Halloween was not a true story. All these other ones are true stories, okay?
Right, yes. Everything on here, true story.
Okay, so I'm just saying Michael Myers Halloween is my favorite film, horror film, and Michael Myers is my favorite horror guy. But I would say Freddy is a lot of fun, absolutely. Okay. Yeah. So in an October 2014 interview, Wes Craven, he's the creator of the film and director. This is from the interview. He says that I read an article in the LA Times about a family who had escaped the killing fields in Cambodia and managed to get to the US. They were fine, and then suddenly the young son was having very disturbing nightmares. He told his parents he was afraid that if he slept, the thing chasing him would get him, so he tried to stay awake for days at a time. When he finally fell asleep, his parents thought this crisis was over. Then they heard screams in the middle of the night. By the time they got to him, he was dead. He had died in the middle of a nightmare. Here was a youngster having a vision of horror that everyone older was denying. That became the central line of A Nightmare on Elm Street.
That's crazy.
It is crazy. That's legit. And I found the article. This is actually from the journal of the individual. This is a little bit intense. This is the. It says here. First, I was surprised, but right away I got real scared. I was lying in bed, a dark shadow in the night. I was so tired because I was working very hard then. I wanted to go to school, but I had no money. I kept waking up because I was thinking so much about my problems. I heard a noise, but then I turned and I could not move. My bedroom looked the same, but I could see in the corner a dark shape was coming to me. It came to the bed, over my feet, my legs. It was very heavy, like a heavy weight over the whole of my body, my legs, my chest. My chest was frozen like I was drowning. I had no air. I tried to yell so someone sleeping very close to me will hear. I tried to move. I thought, what if I die? After a long time, it went away. It just left. I got up and turned the lights on, but I was afraid to sleep again.
Wow, so that sounds like that sleep paralysis stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So he was actually describing what's been medically proven. People who've had this condition, there's millions that do throughout the world. It's a common, people wake up, their body can't move. And apparently what happens is there's a chemical that goes, I don't know what it is because I'm not a doctor or sleep, but there's a chemical that shuts your body down. So when you're sleeping, you don't punch your neighbor. So it's a safety mechanism so you don't fall out of trees. We used to sleep in trees as humans, if you knew that, or the edge of cliffs. So when you would sleep, you don't really move around too much. So your body actually chemically shuts down. There's whatever that does. But what happens is people will wake up, but for whatever reason, their chemical thing or whatever that it is that freezes the body is still going. So they wake up and they're like, oh my goodness, why am I not moving? This is freaky. And they'll still be having dreams and visions like they are in a dream, but they're really in between. They're both physically in between the dreaming and waking state.
Yeah, I remember first hearing about that. And then after I heard that's a thing, that sleep paralysis, it's always been so strangely enough terrified. Like, I'm always afraid it's going to happen to me. I've never had it happen. There's no evidence that it will ever happen to me, but
the people, even when they understand what it does or what it's from, it's still very disconcerting and frightful. Yeah. Even though they logically know what's going on. Ugh, so
I get it that's a very specific thing to be tied into Freddy Krueger. The story about the actual death, yeah, I guess I could take it that far. But I love the fact that some of these ideas are so simple, and especially Wes Craven, like he can craft an entire narrative and an entire just crazy story around this kind of minor, I don't want to say minor incident, but just this one idea. It has nothing to do with a crazy, janitor who murdered children and comes back. Like, if that was the story that he heard, okay, I get it. It takes such a creative mind to just take that and turn that into such an iconic film.
Absolutely. Great points. Yeah, it's a great franchise. This is a lot of fun. At the end of the day, it's a fun franchise.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, number 9 is the film from 2008, The Strangers. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
You know, it's one of those ones where I love these films so much, like horror films and thriller films and stuff. I remember hearing about it when it came out, but then it's just, this happens all the time. There'll be a movie that comes out, you're like, I'm kind of interested in seeing that. And then a year goes by, then 5 years goes by. Now this was like almost 12 years ago at this point.
Yeah, I think they've already made a sequel, possibly 2 at this point.
Probably.
I'm not sure. Okay, the film is basically about a group of people, couple and a friend of theirs who are in a house, and suddenly weirdos show up and basically knock on the door. And these people don't say anything, and they go in and basically murder these people in very brutal and disgusting and sad fashion. Before I did any research on this, my thought was like, okay, does it take a genius to come up with this idea? Like, this seems like something that anybody would think of. Anyone who's is in a house that's secluded. I know if I go on vacation and there's nobody near me, like, I'm terrified in the woods alone if it's just my wife and I or something like that. But apparently, the writer of this movie, when he was a child, his parents had left he and his sister alone. And apparently some strangers showed up, knocked on the door, asked for someone that did not live there. And they said, no, sorry, you have the wrong home. And they said, okay, fine, and walked away. And apparently then he and his sister went outside and watched these people as they went around the neighborhood and knocked on every door until they found homes where no one answered. And then they would break into those homes and rob them.
Wow.
Which sounds like, first of all, a bad idea. You've been seen by so many people at that point. Like, the cops are going to be able to, make a pretty good identification. I'm assuming this is a true story that this person's saying. But again, it seems like the flimsiest of thread between reality and this film.
Right. Because the actual people that he saw as a child didn't kill anybody.
No.
They wanted the opposite. They wanted to find somebody not home and just rob them. But in this movie, we come into your home and
and we tie you up and we kill you.
Did you see the movie?
I did. Yeah, it's disturbing. It's upsetting.
How many family members are in the family?
It's just a husband and wife and a friend of theirs. Just 3 people.
The friend's dead. Let me guess. The wife makes it at the end.
Do you want me to spoil it?
Sure,
okay. If anybody, they all die. They all die.
Oh,
yeah,
good.
it's not a great end. Or wait, maybe she. Oh shit! Now I don't remember if she gets away or not.
Well, there you go. It's sort of a spoiler,
okay,
not a spoiler. Who knows?
Maybe I shouldn't watch a movie in 2008 and try and talk about it now.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, 2008. Boy, it's almost 13 years ago. This came.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think they did. They had at least one sequel to this.
Okay. But it's still one I wouldn't mind seeing. I enjoy watching people get killed.
Sure, it's great.
But I like those kind of psychological, like, it's not like we talk about the Freddy Krueger.
Yeah.
This is completely opposite. This is the scary, this is real life scary.
Yes.
This is something that, in theory, people, can break into your home and kill everybody.
And I don't know, and you and I talked about this, or I mentioned it very early on before we even started recording. I don't know how we're judging these, but
we should say, if you're first time listener to the show, so what we do is we take a list.
Oh yeah, good idea.
I would argue this is probably the best of list of horror films based on real life concepts. Okay, so that's what this list is. That's the best.
Sure.
Okay, that's the part that's the best. The worst is we're going to pick what we think is the worst from this list. Now the criteria, it's kind of tricky. Here's a spoiler. Number 10,
Sure.
That's a pretty legit correlation between a real life event and the translation on a screen. Though it's a fantastical character, Freddy Krueger,
Right.
but the idea that somebody was scared when they slept and they died because they were afraid of that very thing of sleeping, and that fear killed them in their sleep. That's almost a direct translation from a real
And
event.
I think it's a creative translation. So I think I'm going to give it points for that as well.
So I think it's whatever we might think is the least creative way of doing it. So So at the end of it, that's how we go. I think that's how we're going to do it. So during our discussion, try not to say too much. It was a terrible transition.
Right. Okay.
But because we want to reveal at the end, independent of each other, we're going to pick our own what we think is the worst.
Sure. That is that's mine. That's number 9.
All right. Well, I still want to see the movie, despite the fact the origin story is a little bit weak. I will say that, but
you should see it, especially because I tried to spoil it and I can't. So you're going to be very surprised.
Yeah.
You'll watch it and be like, nobody died. What is he talking about?
Yeah, the intruders, they all got killed. It was a beautiful, happy ending. Number 8 is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now, this is a film that I've heard about for years. I mean, and I'm not a horror like fanatic. Like, I have to see everything. I kind of came late to the horror game. I used to have a lot of nightmares. Speaking of nightmares, I used to have a lot of nightmares as a kid. Scary things scared me when I was a child. So there's a couple movies on this list that I avoided until I became a quote unquote brave. I gotta stop saying quote unquote. Why am I doing that? I'm going to edit that out. Because if Carl's listening, he's going to, he'll say, why does he say quote unquote so much?
It makes you actually sound brave if you don't say quote unquote.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Oh boy, I'm stuck. Okay. And when I became an adult, I recognized, films aren't real life, that kind of thing. And just because I saw it on TV doesn't mean it's going to happen in my house. Just because I saw the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, he's not going to come knocking on my door. But this was a film that even I knew as a teenager and a young adult, I knew this had its own kind of cult status. And it was like, I'd seen a couple like movie stills and magazines and stuff. Like, man, that looks really creepy. A guy called Leatherface, he's got a chainsaw. I don't know if I really want to watch people get destroyed by a chainsaw. Okay.
Sure.
So I just saw the movie for the first time like 4 years ago.
Oh, wow. All right. Very cool.
Not even, maybe like 3 years ago. It was like 2018. Yeah. I freaking love this movie. And the series is bonkers.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely ridiculously bonkers. But the original one, as good as they say, it's such a well done, creepy, amazing film. And very little blood.
Yeah. Very little blood, but it has that realistic quality to it. I mean, it
watching
feels
an old VHF film.
Yeah,
VHS film.
It feels like you're watching a horrific documentary. There's so much moving camera. It's gritty and it's grimy. It doesn't feel polished, and the actors don't feel like actors at all. All of this could be happening to these people. Yes.
And that last dinner scene, the dinner scene at the end there with the family. So for those who don't know what this film is about, it depicts a family of cannibals who abduct, of course, and torture a group of young travelers. And when this movie was released in the theaters, it had this kind of cult status of being based on a true story. Now, the inspiration, though, is from a mass murderer at the time, before the film, about 20 years before the film came out, named Ed Gein. Have you ever heard of him?
Oh, I have, yes.
So Ed Gein, he killed 2 people for sure. He was convicted for 2. They think he killed 9 people. Mm-hmm. And what else he did is that he dug up graves and he made stuff out of the skin. When he was arrested, this is what was found. I'm just going to give a little bit of an idea what was found in his home.
Sure.
Plug your ears if you don't want to hear this. Give it a 30 or a minute skip. Okay. Of course, whole human bones and fragments, a wastebasket made of human skin covering several chairs, skulls on the bedposts, female skulls with some of the tops sawn off, bowls made with human skulls, a corset made from a female torso skin from shoulders to waist, leggings made from the human leg, and so forth and so forth. He even used a pair of lips on a window shade for drawstring.
Not great. Not the kind of guy you want to hang out with, I would say.
Spoiler alert, no shite Sherlock. He had mother issues.
Yes, surprise, surprise.
He took like the skin and clothing of dead woman and dressed up as his mother. So the movie Psycho also drew from that mother-son issue as well. And Silence of the Lambs, Buffalo Bill took cues from that. So that is the real life movies, almost more so Silence of the Lambs than Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But where this movie took the ideas from was the wearing of the flesh, because the guy named Leatherface, he was called Leatherface because he wore the face of his victims. He would change his face and he made skin garments and stuff out of the victims.
Yeah, it's pretty super gross. And I mean, in real life and in the film, of course. You're right that I think Buffalo Bill is probably the most direct connection. Like you can really see that there, and they play that up in that film.
Yeah, because he must be a woman and there's that.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that this film does draw from is he lived in a very isolated area. Like there was nobody around him. It was such a small town. I forget if he was in, one of the Dakotas or something like that. There was nobody around him. And in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like there's nothing else around. That's why those kids go there in the first place.
So in 1974, long before there was the internet or what have you, when you scrolled across that screen based on a true story, it freaked people right out.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So
I think the one thing that we're going to make very clear is please do not pay attention when you see based on a true story in any film whatsoever.
How dare you? How dare you?
I can still remember Fargo, like watching Fargo, and it's like based on real events. And, you know, I'm like 18 years old. I'm like, this is wild. This is crazy. And I'm doing, you know, whatever research an 18-year-old can do at that time. I'm not finding anything. This must not be true.
You watched the Fargo TV series?
I watched the first 2 seasons, kind of lost steam after that. I enjoyed them both a ton.
Oh, watch the third one. That was with Ewan McGregor.
Yes, yeah. I started to watch that, but there's so much stuff on TV. I don't know where
I know it's so much, but Fargo is this TV series, ladies and gentlemen, that you have to watch. It's so quirky, it's so well written, so incredibly filmed and everything. Yeah.
That second one was so great. I really enjoyed the second season of that. Number 7, we get into our first horror comedy.
Yeah.
And it is Return of the Living Dead. Have you seen Return of the Living Dead?
Here's the thing. I love horror films, and I will actually watch The Walking Dead. I'm still watching it. But I don't watch it because of the zombies. I watch it because of the humans. The zombies are uninteresting to me. They're an uninteresting enemy of humans. They don't scare me. They're just gross, you know, because they rip apart bodies and eat you. So the scenes where they rip apart bodies, like, okay, that's cool effects. Like, that's the thing about horror films. I'm always really impressed when they do it well. The effects of horror film is probably the best film to work on.
Oh,
it's probably a blast to work on the guts and the gore and the blood. Like, it's probably a lot of fun and the acting and the screaming and being chased, and it's probably a lot of fun to work on. But that being said, zombies don't interest me. They're just not.
First of all, that's valid. And I will say this, if you do want to watch any of these from the series, or if listeners are interested, I would say watch Dawn of the Dead, which is great. It's the one that takes place in a mall. It gets to the point where bikers are running in, driving their motorcycles through the mall, hitting zombies in the face with pies. Like, it gets to that level in the film. I would then say watch Return of the Living Dead. I mean, Night of the Living Dead is a classic film, but I don't necessarily know that it holds up. I think it was really established. Oh yeah.
So I watched the trailer and I had no idea. It was very innovative for 1985. What it did was it was a film within a film. It looks like they were talking about the movie. Was it the first one, the Night of the Living Dead?
Yes.
And they're saying, how did they kill zombies in that movie? So they were talking about that movie. They would use that movie as a reference on how to take care of the zombies in this movie. So it was kind of like the early. Like Art and Life or type when you kind of mix the two. We're going to talk about it later with the movie Scream, where they did that too.
Yeah, and so it's pretty crazy because in this article that we're going off of here, that's kind of what they say. Now, they give 2 reasons why this is based on true events, and only one is a reason that makes any sense. So, first of all, I think it's important to say this is the first of the series that George Romero did not direct.
Sure.
At this point, he had already done Dawn of the Dead, Night of the Living Dead, not in that order, and he did Day of the Dead. And then Return of the Living Dead was directed by a guy named Dan O'Bannon. The one story they say is that it sounds like a fun story. It's probably just an urban legend, but it's fun. It says that a chemical truck spilled in a graveyard. And as they were hauling away contaminated soil, they uncovered a grave where a body was moving. Ooh, scary. And the other thing they say then is the real reason is that they reference the first movie a lot. And I'm like, well, that's not based on real events. It's based on another movie, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But I enjoy the first sort of story about moving bodies from contaminated, who knows what sort of weird toxic waste.
Sure. I never knew that. Interesting. A chemical truck spilled into a graveyard. Yep. How convenient.
And it's 100% what the movie is. But the movie's straight up a comedy. It's really enjoyable. So people should check it out.
At the very least, watch the trailer. After watching the trailer, I will say I want to watch it now because it looks bonkers.
Oh, when there's a scene, and it might have been in the trailer, where paramedics show up and the zombies rip them to pieces, and the one zombie then gets in the truck and radios back and just says, "Send more paramedics." It's great. It's funny. Fantastic movie.
Awesome. All right, number 6 is a movie I still haven't seen because even though I love horror films and I love scary films and what have you, for some reason ghost films I find a little scary still. Like, because I kind of believe on them, or I kind of think they're, because there's one thing I don't believe in zombies aren't real. Neither is a werewolf or a vampire but I get a little bit uncomfortable with.
Well, I think that's the thing about horror films. If you do have any belief in a certain thing, like if people are really religious, like I think that The Exorcist, I think that really messes with them in a way that it's not going to affect some other people. So if there is something that you're on the fence about, like maybe this is real, maybe it isn't, I think that those things can really affect you.
Now, Poltergeist is an interesting one because it came out in 82.
82, yeah.
It was a Steven Spielberg production, so this was having his name on it. Kind of gave it I would say a family-friendly vibe, but it was certainly a darker movie for him to put his name to. But he's always done dark movies. And I talk about, if you want to check out my Steven Spielberg episode on this feed, if you're a Steven Spielberg fan. I'm not a big fan of his, really, even though I recognize his ability as a director. I'm not a big fan of his. Because he does delve a lot into like dark and murky, and it's always got like a dark element to his films. Like almost like a dark filter to his films as well. But he didn't direct this. He produced it, but he had a creative touch on it, though.
Some people will argue that he directed it because Tobe Hooper directed it, and I think a lot of people don't want to give him credit for it, or it has very Spielbergian.
It does. It's very Spielbergian
moments. So it is kind of like, it feels more like a collaboration.
You're probably right. It's all over the billboards. It's a Steven Spielberg production. They really sold his name on it. Where I bet you people went to it thinking he directed it.
Yeah.
People who don't know, Tobe Hooper is the guy that created and directed Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So,
I don't want to give him any short shrift from this because a lot of things really do feel like Tobe Hooper as well. And I hate it when people try and give Spielberg credit for this film, but having his name all over it, well, people flock to go see it. So I get it.
I think this is a movie. I feel like if I haven't seen it, I've seen so many scenes from it. You know, the scene in the mirror where he's got maggots in his face. That will always. I've seen that scene on YouTube. I think I watched it.
Yeah, so creepy.
And then the scene where the girl's touching the TV. They show them the trailers. And I was a kid, so I was 7, 8 years old when this trailer was playing on, nighttime TV, and it scared the crap out of me as a kid. This little girl touching the screen with static back when we had static on TVs. They're here. It's like,
when they play the national anthem before static, at 3 a.m. or whatever. Yeah. For younger listeners, I think this is important to know, is this is a time 2 to 3 years before the PG-13 rating came into play. So this was rated PG. Yeah. And so if you thought you were going in to a PG-rated Steven Spielberg movie, I couldn't imagine how messed up some of those kids must have been.
I'm sure parents left for the first time. Yep. I guarantee you.
Yeah.
Because, this was E.T. time. So, look, it's a Steven Spielberg film. Yeah. It's based on basically, long story short, it's a haunted house. And so you'd say, well, guys, there's tons of accounts of haunted houses. Absolutely. But there was a particular home or a particular family in 1958. In Seaford, New York, the Herman family made national news after reporting strange occurrences in their home. They had stuff like objects being moved, bottles suddenly popping their tops, and spilling their contents. Now, this poltergeist was given the nickname Popper the Poltergeist in this home. And they were only there for about 4 to 6 months. How the haunting started was just like that. Apparently, every liquid bottle, and they had, I don't know why, but they had so many, from liquid detergent to bleach to whatever it was, the lids would pop off. And the father thought it was the son doing stuff with some sort of chemical reaction. So he would follow his son around for days over the weekend to see, okay, I'm going to watch him like a hawk. And while he was watching them, he never did anything, and these things would still go off. I've done a lot of poltergeist or haunting investigations on my own just as a hobby, read stories, accounts, podcasts. And sometimes poltergeists, for whatever reason, when they're not scaring a family enough, they'll kind of increase their activity. And so this Popper the Poltergeist, he then increased his activity. He started throwing stuff around the house, objects, religious artifacts like the Mary statue, like little ornaments and stuff, smashing them, bookshelves being thrown around, and other witnesses, police officers, and people came as witnesses too. And apparently a news crew came there. I couldn't find it on YouTube because this happened on national television. But a news crew was there, and stuff was moving around on TV. It was the first haunted reality TV show, they say.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Wow. Yeah. In this movie, there's a scene, and you're saying you're not sure if you've seen it or not. There's a scene where the mother realizes that there's some force in here that can move the chairs across the kitchen floor, and she's having a ball with this. And it's one of those things where watching it, you're like, you need to get out of this house right now. Like, what are you doing? Why are you playing with these weird entities? Like, that seems so wrong and misguided.
And there was another scene, I believe, where there's a tree that comes crashing through the house.
Yep, it grabs the kid.
Yeah, that I think I had a friend tell me about that when I was a kid, and that idea just terrified me as a child.
Super scary. There's a terrifying clown. It's a great movie, but please, listeners, it's rated PG. Don't show it to your kids. Don't do that.
No. I think I need to do this. I think I need to watch it.
You should give it a shot.
I think so. Okay, so that's the based on the real events. So a family
All right.
haunted. That was about it. They didn't name. I don't think they named the poltergeist in the movie, but Popper the Poltergeist is what this movie was based on, and the family terrorized by that. Yeah,
very cool. Number 5 is the film When a Stranger Calls. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Another one I haven't seen yet.
Okay.
I'm not familiar with it at all. I don't think.
Yeah, all right. The original was in 1979, and they remade it in 2006. So it's sort of based on two things, just like the last one I said, but these aren't quite as goofy. I think we probably all heard the urban legend where a babysitter's watching kids and she keeps getting weird phone calls and stuff like that. Check on the kids, check on the kids.
Right.
And after a while of this, she calls out to the police and says, hey, I'm getting these weird phone calls and everything. And the police say, we're going to trace the number. Just sit tight. And of course, when the police call back, they say, you need to get out of the house. The calls are coming from inside the house. Right. So that's a famous urban legend, famous story. And I guarantee you that's where this came from. But there was an incident back in 1950. The Columbia Police Department received a call from a 13-year-old girl, and she was babysitting a 3-year-old child. Basically, she called the cops and said, come quick, and then the line went dead. The police didn't really know what to do. They didn't act maybe as quickly as they should have given that, but it was 1950, whatever.
Right, sure.
Cars that can barely reach 60 miles an hour. So when they got to the house, they find that she had been brutally assaulted and murdered. The kid was fine, but she had been killed. They never found anyone. They never pinned this on anybody at all, but rumors had said that it must have been an inside job for some reason. The killer seemed to know the layout of the house. So that's where this movie comes into play. And the movie really is the first, and not to spoil it, I don't want to, but the movie does start with sort of a brutal murder of a babysitter getting calls from inside the house, just like the urban legend.
And the main girl is like the second maybe victim? Okay.
Yes, it's very much Psycho. It's like, okay, we're following this person. I kind of get it. And, well, all right, that storyline is over.
Oh,
and
interesting.
then it goes
I was wondering how they did this for 90 minutes. I watched the trailer, and I was like, okay, so she's watching a couple kids. And
yeah. I haven't seen the remake. I haven't seen the 2006 version, so I'm not sure what they do there. But, yeah, it does seem like a flimsy thing to like run across 90 minutes.
Yeah. The cat and mouse game is really kind of boring.
Yes.
Like, I'm going to hide in this room. I'm going to get away from you here, and then I'm going to hide in this room.
Oh, it's one of those things where when you watch the first 20 minutes of the movie, you're like, this is a killer Twilight Zone episode. Like, this is great. And I'm not saying the movie falls apart after that, but it's clearly not as interesting as it is early on. So if anybody wants to check out just the first act of it, great, do it. You won't be disappointed.
Okay. I'm still kind of curious. That's another one I wouldn't mind seeing, yeah. But I have seen number 4, and very few horror fans haven't. And that, of course, is Scream and the entire Scream series. Mm-hmm. This came out in 1996, and this came out when, you could argue, in the mid-90s, horror films were dead. You had the Jason versus Freddy, and all the earlier films were talking about the Halloween films. They were straight to video practically. What was once in the 80s a great draw for teenagers, they kind of scoffed at it now. Those teenagers now are, young adults and adults are like, come on, this is stupid. Things weren't scary anymore. I saw this in the theaters. I would have been 21 at the time. And I think this might have been the first horror movie I saw in the theaters.
Oh, okay.
Like everything else at this time, I probably would have seen on VHS.
Yeah.
And so this was kind of my first foray into the theater to see a scary film. And I remember watching the theater with, of course, a full house. And it was really quite fun to hear the screams from the those days are, I feel like they're days gone by now. But,
right, yeah.
But so Wes Craven, the creator of Nightmare on Elm Street, reinvented, again, the horror genre with the Scream film. Because what the Scream film does, and it's funny that you talked about the film just previous, When a Stranger Calls, because this opening sequence in Scream is exactly that. We have a girl played by Drew Barrymore, which was a big actress at the time, right? And she's on the phone and she's getting prank called. She's like, "Who's calling me?" And they're like, "I'm calling you from inside the house." They said something to the effect where you could tell that they were in the house.
Yeah.
She gets killed at the very beginning of the film. And we're like, whoa, that's crazy. You know, Drew Barrymore's dead, you know? That's how the film starts. And it really turns the expectations of the audience on their head. And then these teenagers throughout the film kind of make fun of horror films. But then they end up becoming a part of a horror film. And they fall into the same tropes that they're making fun of. So it's done really, really, really inventive, really well. I think it just reinvented the horror film. Of course, there's many rip-offs afterwards, like I Know What You Did Last Summer and Urban Legend or whatever those were. But this was the original. Again.
Yeah, and again, like you said, it kind of saved the horror genre. Like I don't think people understand how terrible horror movies were in the 90s. They were not good. People didn't know what to do. Freddy was on his last legs, and so was Jason. There was just nothing new happening. And this movie was wildly successful, super popular. And like you said, if you didn't really pay attention to the ads, previews, stuff like that. I remember watching it, and I think I watched it on video, but I was not paying attention to the movie when it exploded. And I started to watch it thinking, oh, Drew Barrymore is the main character of this. And I was shocked. First of all, I was like, what wig did they put her in? But after that, then she's killed, and it's just like, oh, I did not see that coming. And it seemed so brutal and so intense and actually legitimately scary.
Yeah, there were some intense, scary moments in that film. I remember being scared in the theater, and it was fun to be scared. It was that kind of scared. Like, you're like, oh, this is cool. The jump scare was fun.
Yep.
But now, what was this based on? Now, Kevin Williamson wrote the film. You might recognize that name from Dawson's Creek creator, Kevin Williamson. Did you know that?
No, I've never seen a moment of Dawson's Creek.
Okay, well, he created that. He created that that franchise. So the idea began after hearing a news story regarding a man named Danny Rolling, who murdered 5 college students, and he actually decapitated one of them all in one night when he was robbing 2 college campuses. That was it.
That's nuts. Like, that's crazy.
So he went on to murder like another 11 people or whatever it was. Wow. It was like, yeah, he was brutal. So he came home one night, Williamson, after hearing this news, and he saw that his window was, he doesn't remember having it open when he came home. So that planted the seed, and he penned an 18-page short story that would later form the foundation for the film Scream.
Wow. That's pretty interesting. I like how Wes Craven films are on here twice, but he's only given credit once.
Right. This was he directed that, and Kevin Williamson wrote that one. Also, though, it's interesting. The movie was originally called Scary Movie.
Oh, my God.
But they ended up using that title for the parodies of the Scream films called Scary Movies. Yeah.
Wow.
I kind of like the name Scary Movie. I kind of wish...
So do I. It's funny because there is a very low-budget horror film that was made, I think, in 91, which was called Scary Movie. And I'm just wondering if that's why, in the end, Wes Craven was like, oh, maybe we shouldn't do this.
Oh, okay. Because I actually really liked that title. I was like, this is a scary movie. And it was at the time. Like I said, it really was. It scared the crap out of teenagers watching it again in the theaters.
Of course. I would like the idea of using the title Scary Movie just because I'm not crazy about using Scream, because I don't think a lot of people get the painting reference and the scream and all that. Like, I have heard people, and I hated it when eventually the killer started to be referred to as Ghostface. I'm like, why are you calling him Ghostface? It's a painting. It's not called Ghostface. That bothered me, but that's irrational.
All right, number 3.
All right, so number 3, The Blob. Don't know if you're familiar with The Blob or not.
I'm familiar with it. I haven't seen the film, but it's one of those ones where I've seen so many snippets and footage.
Sure. It's fun because the original was from 1958, and they remade it. Again, I have another film that's a remake. They remade it in 88, and both are phenomenal, actually.
Oh, really?
It's not a downgrade. Honestly, if you're just going in for the first time, I'd say watch the 88 version. It's pretty cool. But the original one in 58, it's also funny because Steve McQueen, who was probably pushing 45 at the time, plays a teenager. It's kind of silly. Yes.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. And the movie's great. It's a blob from outer space. It's this monstrous blob that grows and feeds off of people. It then increases in size and so on and so forth. But the story that it is based on, I'm going to say, In 1950, again, 1950, didn't put that together. 2 police officers reported seeing something float down from the sky and land in a field. When they investigated, they discovered an odd purplish substance with a similar consistency to soap that dissolved when you touched it. A half hour later, it had completely melted away. So this isn't just 2 people talking, because then the Air Force was called in. But of course, when the Air Force got there, there was nothing left to examine, so nothing was done. But that's where this idea had come from.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm going to say it doesn't take a whole lot to make up some sort of UFO alien tale, especially if you're talking about stuff from the 40s and 50s when all this, when there was UFO mania. But just the idea of this oozy substance. It's not a Star Trek alien walking around talking to you who has 2 arms and 2 legs and he just has like horns on his head or something. This was completely different than what people had seen in any type of film or TV show before this.
This is interesting that those 2 police officers made this report, because I always wonder what's in it for them to make the report if it's not real.
I don't know. You get your name in the paper, right? They're coming up on retirement. And they're like, we got to make a name for ourselves somehow. But it seems, I don't know.
But would you?
Something there?
Would you though? Would you ever make a report of seeing something? Even in today's social media viral, I wouldn't do it if I didn't have video footage of anything. Why would I make a report that I saw something fall from the sky? What's the point?
Oh, what's the point? Yeah. Especially if you know that you're lying. If you have malicious intent, you have to know you're going to be found out. Or do you want all that extra attention? I wouldn't. I don't want to follow up reports and having to answer the same questions over and over again. No way.
That's always been my devil's advocate in favor of UFO reports or whatever, what people are saying. Like, what's in it for them other than them being called crazy? Now, maybe some people are just lying because they are liars.
Sure.
But not everyone's doing it. Some real respectable people are saying things that are like,
yes.
What's the point?
I mean, a lot of times I think it's just people think they see something that they didn't, or it turns out to be, it really was dish soap and it just looked weird under the night sky or something like that. But I really applaud the makers of the film for taking on the idea of UFOs and aliens in a very different way.
Yeah.
And if it came from this story, that's pretty clever, I think.
Okay, I'm going to check out the Blob. I got a few to check out now. Great.
Yeah, sure.
And I definitely didn't know about that origin story. Interesting. Okay, Annabelle. Have you seen Annabelle?
I have not. I think it's the only thing on this list that I have not seen.
Okay, I've seen this. I've seen all the Conjuring films, all the Conjuring universe films. They're great films.
You have? Wow.
Oh, I love them. Yeah, I love them. They're very well done.
The only one I watched, it might seem like a weird one to watch, was The Nun.
That's the one I haven't seen. I heard that one wasn't too great.
It's not very great. It's more of a gothic horror movie. It looks beautiful. There's like big mansions and it's not scary at all.
Well, the Conjuring films are based on Ed and Lorraine Warren. They're kind of like paranormal possession type. They're part of I think they're Catholic, I believe, and by faith. They're basically called in X-Files almost. They're called in to take care of houses that are haunted or people that are possessed, and they've written books and done interviews, and there's a lot of scrutiny under their credibility. They were in charge of the Amityville Horror. They've done it all, okay? And so, but there's money to be made in this business, and there's some speculation and that maybe their stories aren't true. So this kind of ties into Annabelle. Now, Annabelle is based on a doll. This one starts in 1970 after a nursing student received an antique Raggedy Ann doll as a birthday gift from her mother. Almost immediately, she and her roommate noticed odd things happening in their apartment. They would find the doll in different positions. Then when they left it, then odd cryptic notes began to appear with messages like, "Help me." And this was shown in the film Annabelle. A psychic was then called and informed them that the doll was indeed possessed by a young girl named Annabelle. So the roommates tried to let the spirit reside with them. Hey, you can hang out with us. However, as time went by, things began to turn dark. Like we said before, if a poltergeist is showing itself and it's not getting the point across to you, who's a non-poltergeist, they might up their ante. So scratches began to appear on them, reports of oozing blood from the doll, and even one claimed that they were attacked. Ed and Lorraine were called in, like the big professionals, right? So they examined the doll, and they determined indeed that the spirit was actually demonic in nature. So they cleansed the apartment, and they took the doll back to their occult museum, where it remains locked up to this day. So they actually have a legit Ed and Lorraine Warren. I think one of them has passed away. I think Ed maybe.
Oh, okay. I thought they had both died.
Or maybe
by
they're
this
both
point, but I could be wrong.
Well, they're based back in the 70s,
Right,
what have you. If they're not dead now, they're very old. They actually, they have a museum of. I mean, I'm sure it's very interesting artifacts.
Oh, sure.
The dolls there, and it's like in the glass cage, and they have all these other different stuff. And it's almost each item could have its own film of how it came to be. That's kind of the Conjuring universe. So they've done that with the doll. They've done that. And they've made a few movies from the doll, for Pete's sakes.
Yeah.
The problem is that the only people who have the account of this doll are the owners of the doll.
Right. Sure.
That's the story of the doll.
Right.
You see what I'm getting at?
Oh yeah. No, of
Okay.
course. Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing that I will say is there's something interesting about this being part of the list, because this basically is like, here's the story behind this doll. Here's all the crazy nonsense these people said about this doll. And guess what? We just made a movie about it. It's not taking a leap. It's not saying, oh, that's an interesting concept. Now I'm going to put my own twist. It's basically just saying, like, you know what? Great story. Let's just run with it. Let's just do this. I don't know if that makes it good or if that makes it bad, but it's really the first one we've talked about where it seems like story to film, no change, no spin on it. Here we go. That's it.
Now, there are a lot of accounts of dolls being really creepy.
Sure.
That's the thing. So I don't know if this Annabelle doll itself is true. That's a true story, that it's this Raggedy Ann doll did things to these college student roommates.
Right.
Maybe. But again, there's so many accounts of people having dolls doing really weird things.
Oh, yeah. You know, you're talking about ghost films. I don't like creepy doll movies. I really don't.
You won't like Annabelle.
No, I have daughters. I have dolls everywhere. I do not. That's one thing that I do not want to see. Like, I don't want that. Like,
My daughter has dolls in her room, and they freaking. I hide them.
Terrifying. I'm like, how can you sleep in this room? I wouldn't be able to.
So why is that? I wonder why that is. It's weird.
I don't know. There's been so many weird doll possession things. I talked about the Twilight Zone earlier. There's a Twilight Zone episode with Telly Savalas called Talking Tina, and the doll murders the father of this family. It's terrifying. I don't like
boy.
it. That and creepy kids, like murderous kid movies. I don't like those either. Number one. We're on to number one here, and we're going back to Steven Spielberg with Jaws.
Yeah.
I mean, do I even need to talk about what Jaws is? If you haven't seen Jaws, you know what Jaws is about. It's a killer shark. The end.
I've even seen Jaws. I'm not a big Spielberg fan. Another thing that I'm not a fan of is killer animal movies. They're boring.
Yes. Okay, good. I thought you were going to say you're scared of them. I don't like.
No.
I don't find any. It's not
boring.
entertaining. No, I don't like those movies whatsoever.
I like mindless attacking Michael Myers. Yeah,
Sure.
But I don't like animals attacking. To me, it's just boring. And I've always said with Jaws, here's a newsflash, guys: stay out of the water.
Yeah, the end.
I know the end. Don't swim.
It could have been a 10-minute long movie, although you could say that about any movie. I remember talking to somebody once after we watched Good Will Hunting, and we walked out of the theater, and she was like, I could have told that story in 20 minutes. I was like, that's not the point. I mean, anybody could have done that, but anyway.
This is well loved because I think a lot of people love the way it was filmed.
Oh, I enjoy the movie. I really do.
But I'm actually bored.
Oh, really? Okay. I need to
rewatch it. It's been 30 plus years. It has been a long time. I think the last time I saw it, I was a teenager, and maybe I just.
Yeah.
But even to this day, though, anything like any animal movie, talking animal movies, I can't stand. I don't like animal movies.
Yeah, and I think a lot of my reason is I grew up with so many pets, and I still have so many pets, and I just don't. I know there are people out there that are terrified of dogs or something like that, so maybe those films really bother them, or maybe they enjoy them because they could see being mauled by a bear if they're off somewhere. It's nothing I give any thought to, so it's not going to bother me at all. But I also don't think of Jaws as an animal attack movie. I should, but I don't, because it's so well written. The music is great. Anyway, I don't have to tell people that Jaws is worth checking out. Just check it out. So most people, the one thing I found out is that most people speculated that the novel, and we're talking about the novel because it's 100% based on a novel, was based off of a string of shark attacks that took place in New Jersey in 1916. But Benchley, the author, says that's not the case. He talks about the fact that there was a 4,500-pound great white that had been harpooned off the coast of Long Island in 1964. If people don't know anything about fish weights or shark weights, 4,500 pounds is wild and terrifying for being right off the coast of Long Island. So, of course, that's the inspiration for the novel, which then, I know we're talking about Spielberg a lot, but he just took a novel and adapted it here. That's where it came from. That's where the author got the idea to write this story down. I've never read the book. And if anybody's bored by the movie, I can't imagine the book is all that interesting.
I gotta rewatch the movie. I know.
Yeah.
My ever-growing queue of things to watch. I know I've seen it before, but...
Sure. It's tough because I'll watch something as, a 15-year-old and I'm like, I hated it. And people say, give another chance. I'm like, why do I want to bother giving it another chance? Like, I didn't like it then. And if I don't like it now, I just wasted 2 hours.
Yeah.
That's the list.
That's the list. I always go in kind of thinking I know what I'm going to pick, but I actually... As we talk about the topics and as we go through it, my mind kind of changes.
As we went through, I wrote down a couple of yours, things I had not researched as possibilities. But what did you... Do you want to make a call here?
I think, and this doesn't reflect the film.
Sure.
Okay, so we're not reading the films.
No.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I think for me, the one that just doesn't really translate very well to film from what may or happen in real life is number 7, Return of the Living Dead.
100% on board. That's the one I picked.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was between that or The Strangers, which I kind of just thought was lazy because, I don't know, people ring people's doorbell and they robbed houses. And, that seemed kind of lazy. Return of the Living Dead, there's nothing there. There is absolutely nothing there. It's just you going... That movie made a ton of money. I now, I guess, have the rights to make the next one. Let's make it silly. That's the point of that movie. That movie takes it to a silly, crazy level. I don't care about a story about radioactive waste on a graveyard. Who cares?
Yeah,
you made a silly movie.
I mean, even the other ones have some sort of semblance of really happening, where this is like, come on, really? A chemical truck spilled on a graveyard, and a leg moved.
A leg to move while you were removing dirt. What do you think is going to happen?
Even if that story was true, it has very little to do with the film.
Yeah, but it's not like a person got up and wandered around and started eating somebody. If that was the story, great. You know what? I'll buy it. Make your movie. Say that that's what it's based on. That's very flimsy.
Well, it has been a real pleasure, Doug, having you on.
I appreciate you having me. This is so much fun. Anytime.
And say again where people can find you.
Good Times, Great Movies, just whatever. Open up your browser, go into Ask Jeeves or whatever you use, type in Good Times, Great Movies, and you'll find us. We're all over the place.
And remember, in front of every silver lining, there's a cloud, and we're here to help you find it. Thank you again, and thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you.
Gamma Gator Productions.